second day of the Climate Change Summit in Lima, the capital of Peru. Representatives from more than 190 countries have engaged in a tough negotiation trying to reach a new worldwide deal to curb global warming. With 2014 on track to become the warmest year on record and time running short, the representatives began talks to limit greenhouse gas emissions and keep global warming from causing irreversible damage. New targets for fossil fuel use were announced ahead of the climate conference by the U.S., the European Union and China, the first Asian nation to make such a pledge. And this has injected optimism into negotiations that are supposed to climax in Paris next year with the adoption of a long-awaited climate pact. Our correspondent Dan Collins has been covering the summit in Lima, and he told us earlier what was being discussed.
The three biggest emitters, the US, China and the European Union, have all made commitments to cut emissions, has given an impetus to the beginning of these talks, and it's put pressure on other developed industrialized nations, particularly those in the G20, to also follow suit to cut their emissions as well. So we're talking particularly about countries like Australia, Canada, Japan, which have been singled out by observers, and also attention has been focused on emerging economies such as India, which doesn't have strong emissions at this time, but is expected that in the next few years or even decades that those emissions are likely to increase significantly. In the light of the IPCC report, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they said that even with the commitments made by China, the US and the EU, it's still well short of the 40 to 70% cuts in emissions which will be needed to be made by 2050 to avoid a temperature rise of 2 degrees Celsius, which could unleash much worse effects of climate change.
China-U.S. Internet Industry Forum has begun in Washington, bringing together over 150 government officials, industry leaders and academics to discuss the reality and prospects of cooperation in the cybersphere between the two countries. Jia has more.
Strengthening dialogue and cooperation. The theme of the forum highlights the trend of China-U.S. relations on the Internet issue.
With the booming development of the Internet, the cyberspace relation between China and U.S. has gained unprecedented attention and importance. The China-U.S. relation on the Internet issue is now an important component of the new model of major power relationship between the two countries and decides the future of both countries to a great extent.
Liu said China and the U.S. share a common interest. While problems do exist, consensus overweighs disagreement, and there's more dialogue than confrontation.
I think 90% of our Internet issues are at a consensus, and only 10% represent disagreements. We should focus on the 90% consensus and expand its share, thereby reducing the amount of disagreements.
His views were echoed by U.S. Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy and Environment.
We have to work together and want to work together as friends, and that's how I think we should take this forward.
The two-day forum is co-hosted by the Microsoft Corporation and the Internet Society of China. The delegates are focusing their discussions on cloud service, Internet access and administration. CCTV.